This is sure to be a special day where the opening markers of a statewide conversation of how we engage in productive discussion of differences across party lines will be laid down for the rest of us to pick up. First, though, we're delighted to have the chance to welcome the Kraus family, who have been a sheer delight to work with as we've put this day together for you. I call to the stage my friend and colleague and collaborator, the Meyer Bascom Professor of all things interesting and awesome, Dhavan Shah, who will introduce the wonderful Toni Sikes.
Always dangerous to follow Mike whenever speaking is involved. He's a great opener, and I'm glad to be able to join all of you today and have you join us as we reflect on Bill Kraus's legacy and explore how we might return to a politics where we actually converse and compromise across lines of political difference. In 2018, when celebrating their 10th anniversary, the Wisconsin Institute of Public Policy and Service established a Lifetime Achievement Award to honor an individual whose life demonstrates, quote, the highest qualities of civic leadership. The WIPPS Advisory Board unanimously decided to honor Bill Kraus, noted political strategist and longtime co-chair of Common Cause Wisconsin, by both establishing the award in his name and naming him the first recipient of the Bill Kraus Lifetime Achievement Award in Civic Leadership. It's a fitting double recognition, as Kraus Award winners are supposed to, quote, embody the principles of positive change, civic dialogue, civic leadership, and commitment to working towards intelligent solutions for the common good of citizens and communities in Wisconsin. I think we're going to hear throughout the day in this conference just how much Bill Kraus defined those qualities and how important they are to return to for our state. Bill Kraus, as Mike explained, served as a top aide to Lee Dreyfus after he spearheaded his upstart 1978 campaign for governor. They crisscrossed the state in a school bus, and Bill's widow, Toni, shared with me yesterday that campaign cost $150,000. When Tommy Thompson was sharing stories about his first of 4 successful gubernatorial campaigns, the cost for that was $1 million. We just experienced a $100 million gubernatorial campaign in the state, the most expensive in history. We are really struggling with how we can deal with these challenges, and I think that's part of what we're going to explore today. Money in politics, what it's doing to the corrosive nature of our civic discourse, and how we can potentially come back from that. After his time in government, Bill Kraus spent 2 decades co-chairing Common Cause in Wisconsin, and is widely respected for his tireless advocacy of open government and common sense campaign reform. When reporting on his passing in December of 2018 at the age of 92, the Wisconsin State Journal noted, Kraus was respected by political foes and allies alike for using his intelligence, common sense, and grace to orchestrate compromise solutions to state government. There's that word again, compromise. And it's something that we are very concerned with, and as you'll see, we've dedicated a lot of a survey that we were going to share with you in about an hour to that question about how tolerant people are for compromise, under what conditions they're willing to do it, and when they resist those impulses. When Kraus was honored with the award that bears his name, he spent time remarking how gerrymandering is killing fair elections in Wisconsin and around the country. The consequences, which we'll focus on today, the erosion of civic life in Wisconsin, is something that I'm hopeful we'll be able to not only start a conversation about, but hopefully start working towards solutions that we can all enact together. As we plan this conference, it's also been a pleasure to learn more about Bill and to get to know Toni. Toni is also an exceptionally accomplished community builder. She is co-founder and CEO of CodaWorks, a global online community that celebrates interior and architectural design projects featuring commissioned artwork. She founded Artful Home, an e-commerce company that is now the largest retailer of artist-created home furnishings, and authored The Artful Home. using art and craft to create living spaces you'll love. As we worked to put together the conference program, we were struck by how Bill and Toni share a focus on creating spaces, whether across the state or within one's home, that are open, inviting, and welcoming. Toni Sikes has served on the boards of many organizations supporting the arts and artists, including the Chazen Museum of Arts. She also serves as chair of the Wisconsin Technology Council and the Center for Healthy Minds. As a master's alum of UW-Madison in market research, we are pleased to welcome fellow Badger and concerned Wisconsin citizen Toni Sikes.
Okay, you get to hear one more person talk about Bill Kraus, and I will try not to be redundant. Thank you so much, Mike. You and your colleagues have done a fantastic job of organizing this, and I speak for the entire Kraus family and want to recognize Sally Kraus, who's here with us today, in expressing our gratitude, especially to the Tao Foundation, and in particular, Leonard Tao. We are overwhelmed with their generosity, and I also want to acknowledge the many people who are here today who knew and worked with Bill over the years, and they're going to be filtering in and out throughout the day. Bill died in December 2018. We held his memorial service on January 13th, 2019, in Tripp Commons at the Union. Among the 300 plus people who were there gathering to pay tribute, there were 4 previous Wisconsin governors, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. In addition to this, there were 3 Supreme Court justices, 2 progressives and 1 conservative. Now, I mention the Supreme Court justices because they didn't really like each other very much, but they all loved Bill, and they were all women. So it's impossible to sum up a person who spent his life totally devoted to the cause of democracy, but I'm going to give you some broad strokes to fill in some of the details that have already been mentioned. Bill was an active corporate citizen working in various vice president roles, both at Century Insurance and Equitable Life Insurance in New York. While at Century, he was in charge of a small venture capital fund. And in 1973, he invested in Century Communications, a startup cable company. He invested $22,000 in cash and a $5 million line of credit. But what he really was doing was investing in Leonard Tao, who he had told me many times he believed was the smartest person he ever knew. Bill and Lynn became very close friends, and for the next 45 years, they traveled together, did business together, talked politics together, and helped each other through life's hardships. Bill served as chairman of Century Communications in the very beginning for the early years and continued to serve on that board until 2002, when Century sold to Adelphia in a deal valued at $5.2 billion. It was a good investment. Business is how Bill earned a living, but his lifelong enduring passion was politics. He believed that politics is an honorable profession, practiced by honorable people, and he consistently championed the reform issues in order to keep it honorable. He was active in over 30 campaigns throughout his lifetime, beginning with Melvin Laird's 1952 election to Congress He then went on to assist in electing Warren Knowles for 3 consecutive terms as governor. But he is best known as masterminding the Dreyfus campaign, and it was an extraordinary campaign that went down in Wisconsin history. It's already been talked about, but I'll fill in a few other details. When Lee joined the Republican Party a week before he announced he was running for governor. At that time, he was chancellor of the University of Wisconsin in Stevens Point, a mid-sized town in the middle of the state, and he had about 3% name recognition. They broke every rule, as Mike had mentioned, and I'm not going to repeat that. But one thing I would like to point out is that they didn't have any money, so they couldn't buy 60-second advertising on television. So instead, they took half-hour shows in time slots that nobody watched. So they were really cheap to buy, mostly late-night shows. Very few people saw those shows, but the important thing is Lee was there for half an hour. They did a number of these, and he talked about policy. I mean, what a concept. Policy. Somebody running for governor talking about policy. And the press covered those. So we got extensive press for these shows. And I do want to do a shout out for Marcia Lindsay, who was the producer of these shows just out of college. Marcia, are you here in the room? She's right over there. Long history with Marcia as well. Then when he pulled off the surprise of the century by beating the incumbent Democrat, this team of crazy people moved from Stevens Point down to Madison to actually try and run the government. That was a shock for them all. Bill served as communications director. He became the leading voice other than Lee, who always took the front seat, and this administration was known for its openness and bipartisan civility because they had an all-Democrat. It was the reverse of what we have today. They had a Republican governor and a Democratic Senate and Assembly. And guess what? To get things done, they actually had to work together. And I think you'll hear more about that from Tim Cullen later this afternoon. One other thing I'll mention about that time, because this is actually when I met Bill and got to know him, and he started this thing called the bullpen. He totally rearranged where people sat outside of the governor's office. He brought all of the officials into this big open room, and then he said to everyone, come on in, listen to us, sit at our desk, hear our phone conversations. And the press did that. They came in, they sat, they listened, and they came to trust and respect. This is how Bill actually went about bringing transparency to government. Unfortunately, after Lee left office, things went back to the way they were. So his buddies were politicians and reporters. He loved hanging out with them. For 40 years, the reprobates, which is what he called them behind their back, had lunch every Friday at the Avenue Bar. That auspicious group still gathers on Friday, but today they canceled their lunch so that they could be here with us. So we'll be seeing them come in and out. He was always honest and direct, which maybe is not the the best of attributes when you're married to him, but two qualities that would get him in trouble from time to time. I have a framed cartoon on my wall that shows Republicans with torches wanting to burn him at the stake. He had just announced to the media, this is 1972, he had just announced to the media that he would not cast a vote for Richard Nixon and would instead vote for George McGovern. Now, he was one of the leaders of the Republican Party when he did this. So you can imagine the response from the Republicans in the state when he made that announcement. I think he actually liked stirring up trouble. He was, in the 1980s, he was invited to write an article for the newsletter of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, an arm of the Republican Party. The title of his piece was, "Why I Believe It Is Important to Pay Taxes." As most of you know, WMC is devoted to cutting taxes. That is their raison d'etre. So he got lots of phone calls about that one. So in 1982, when Dreyfus decided not to run again, Bill and I moved to New York, where Bill worked for Equitable and Century Communications, and it was a wonderful time for us to spend with Lynn and his wife Claire. But he was itching to get back to Wisconsin, and in 1990 we returned. And this became the period when he moved into the role of citizen politician. He thrived as an insightful commentator on state politics. As it's been mentioned, he served as a panelist on Wisconsin Public Television's weekend program. And behind the scenes, he served as a private sounding board for political aspirants, both Democrat and Republican. As one reporter noted, Bill Kraus is on a mission to try and steady the sinking ship of democracy overloaded with influence money. Sometimes he reminded me of Don Quixote, always chasing windmills. In 1990, Bill and Ann Peckham started a national organization of Republican women to advocate for abortion rights. That was 1990. And because, as they stated, the government had no business legislating on such personal matters. Also in 1990, this is one of my favorites, he launched a campaign to ban political advertising on television. He wrote, "We ban tobacco advertising on television because it is dangerous to physical health. Political advertising on television is dangerous to our emotional and intellectual health." Amazingly, several newspapers actually picked up and reprinted that article. It was about a 2-month campaign. It didn't go anywhere, obviously. And because he was constantly in the media, people did come to see Bill as the conscience of Wisconsin politics. It was mentioned that he co-chaired with Toni the Common Cause. What was not mentioned was that he served 4 years on the National Common Cause board and was the only Republican on that board. And I think above all else, and for those of you here who knew him, he was a writer. He was a voluminous writer. He was compelled to write every day. And in looking back through his clippings, I brought this. He wrote this great, priceless article about Tommy Thompson in 1995. He wrote about anybody who would talk to him, any issue that came to his mind. His writing was extraordinary. It was crisp and witty and incisive, because he believes so strongly that if well informed, the collective wisdom of common men and women would result in good decisions for our democracy. So he did everything in his power to inform and to educate. He moved mountains using his amazing wit. In 1982, he published the Kraus Rules of Government, and by the way, we published these rules on the back of the program at his memorial service. So I'm going to read you just a couple of these rules in closing. If the press is covering it, the meeting is important. Difficult decisions do not get easier if they are delayed. How about climate change? When someone calls for leadership, his tail is in a crack. And this is my favorite. When people are interested in government that works, partisans are interested in issues that inflame. So I'll use this point as my closing. Again, many, many thanks to the Tao Foundation. Thank you, Eileen, for being here. But most particularly, thank you to that dear and wonderful man, Lin Tao. I know you are watching. Lin loved and appreciated Bill and vice versa. Lin understands that this event is the very best way to celebrate Bill's passion for democracy and hopefully keep his voice ringing in our ears as we ponder the state that our democracy is in and what we can do about it. Thank you.